Vaheguru, 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 Vaheguru.
I would like to thank you all on behalf of Aston University Islamic Society, the Christian Union, the Sikh Society and the Hindu Society, who've all come together to bring this event. It's the first interfaith event of its kind or concept held at Aston University. The proceedings is going to be similar to the BBC Question Time kind of program, where a topic is given, the panelists are given a few minutes to make some remarks on it, and then this is followed up by any questions posed by the audience or other panelists. The first topic is going to be around the subject of, is there a need for God in society, and is there a need for God for morality? I'll begin by posing this question to Mike Lake, who's our non-faith representative.
Thank you. Just to state the very obvious, there are good religious people and there are bad religious people. There are good non-religious people and there are bad non-religious people. One of the problems I always face is that so many religious people assume that those of us without a belief in God cannot by definition be moral beings. I find that deeply personally insulting. It very rarely happens face to face. People don't say to me, you are not a moral person. But when people of religion amongst themselves talk, they talk about their morality being justified by their religious beliefs. And the implication is that those of us who don't have religious beliefs are in some way immoral, not moral. I would like you to think of turning the question the other way around. How many things can we think of in the world today where immoral things are done in the name of religion? Thank you.
Dr. Shabir, if you would like to make any remarks.
Does society need God? Yes. There are certain big questions in life that are best explained on the assumption that God exists. For example, why do we exist at all? We know that from nothing, nothing comes. Why are we here? And we are something. Well, the explanation that God created us accounts for that. Second, we notice that wherever we look, there is evidence of design. Scientists say that the universe popped into existence some 13.8 billion years ago, and at the very inception of this, what they call the Big Bang origin of the universe, there are certain physical constants which were precisely fine-tuned. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the universe existing and us in it. So what caused this fine-tuning? On the assumption that God is a perfect designer, we have an explanation for this perfect fine-tuning. Third, we are moral beings. The very question, do we need God to be, for us to be moral? Mike's attempt to show you that atheists can be good moral beings is a successful attempt. But the very attempt itself shows that Mike, like the rest of us, think that it is good to be morally upright. But where does that idea come from, that it is good to be morally upright? I'm not asking what are the things that we have to do in order to show that we are morally upright. Just the idea itself that it is good to be good. Where does that idea come from? As Thomas Morris says in his book, Philosophy for Dummies, there are basically two explanations for that gift that we have. Either we inherited through that gift or that idea through a long process of biological and social evolution, in which case we may as well discard that view, or we got that view from the fact that God created us, He being a moral being, and He bestowed that moral understanding to us. Now, if this second view is the correct one, that is the only time we can consider that morality that we hold to be dependable, before we even discuss what are the things we have to do in order to be morally right. The idea itself that it is good to be good and that crime, even if it pays, is wrong, the idea that you ought to fulfill your promises, where does that ought come from? It doesn't come from anything we can describe as part of the physical universe. This is something that supersedes or is supernatural. Where does that come from? The idea that God created us actually gives us that sense, and it is a dependable sense. So 3 reasons so far for thinking not only that God exists and therefore that he is needed to explain the complexities of life, but also the other question was answered: do we need God to have a dependable moral sense? The answer is yes. Otherwise we can be moral if we want to, but we have no reason for thinking that that sense of morality that we have is a dependable sense.
Reverend Richard.
Well, there's lots that's already been said that in many ways I want to agree with. Something that I say every now and again to my congregation. Don't be surprised, and it's, I would hope in your experience too, that you encounter people outside of your faith and tradition who believe in God, who don't believe in God, that are better than lots of religious people. Now I believe that's the case because God created humans with a sense of God and the transcendent, and you know, I'm delighted to encounter people that show me something more of God in their behaviour and their goodness. And I guess what I probably disagree with and want to kind of respond to is the idea that religion as somehow a solution to be better. And for me, there's something about the Christian faith where it's at heart, it's that relationship with God, that it's not necessarily a system where we achieve a better state of goodness, but actually it's an encounter with the living God that transforms us inwardly, and it's a relationship. And you know, religions as systems, I think the Christian faith would want to say, I'm not into religion. You know, what is it that enables us to be better humans? And I would want to say something about Jesus being and modelling something of the life of God to us.
Okay.
So this concept of God that we have, to me, it's more important that it doesn't matter how you view God in the sense of either a separate entity or actually, you know, all-pervading consciousness, which is how some of the Eastern philosophies believe. But essentially, this idea of becoming more self-aware of ourselves, which I think this concept of God, in no matter whatever form that you encounter him or it or even she in, you know, it enables us to gain that sort of higher knowledge and higher well-being. So that, for me, is really this idea of, you know, why God actually plays a part in our lives. I think it enables us to have a set of guidelines, because I think morality is very subjective, and people have different moral views and opinions, and there have to be some set ways of you know, defining, okay, really what is right, what is wrong. So you know, it enables us to live our lives by a better standard, really.
Okay, Jakaraj.
So the question was, do we need God to be moral? Well, for us, asking do we need God, just for a Sikh, would be to say, does someone need to be in love? Yeah. There's lots of people out there that don't want to be in love. They think love might hinder them, as in their career path, might have to get married. However, the person who is in love, they couldn't dream of a world where they wouldn't be in love. So for us, the divine is our other half, is our bigger half, is where we come from, is where we have to go back to. So the first thing is, does a person who wants to love the divine want to be in love? Of course they want to be in love. Whether that helps us to be good or not, as rightly pointed out, there's lots of people that are religious who are not so good, and lots of people that are not religious that are really good people. What Sikhi would say is that there's values that we have to live by, and the main value we must live by is compassion and daya. If society models itself on the idea of compassion, from there we can get dharma, which is righteousness. So a Sikh is always trying to make themselves compassionate, which is why in every Sikh temple there's free food available. The free food available is not just to feed people, it's to allow the Sikhs to actually put that idea of compassion into action. To feed people makes us more compassionate. Also allows us to do something called seva, which is basically giving to other people and learning to give. So anybody can come to the temple and not just eat, but they could start washing up dishes, they could start serving food, they could bring food there, and that allows them to again to learn the value of compassion, and from compassion then flows righteousness. So does someone need religion to be compassionate? No. They can be compassionate people, but just like that tripod that's recording this, for us, if you take away the experience of the divine, then what you're left is with two legs. We have three principles in our faith: to chant God's name, meditate upon God's name, to earn your living honestly, to be a good person, and then to share. With those two things, if you could be a good person that earned honestly and then shared, with a tripod, without the third leg, you still fall over. And that would, because it's almost like having the cake but never eating it. You've done all the hard work of being a good person, being compassionate, being righteous, but you never managed to transcend into the experience of the divine that we came here to do, which is for us, is by chanting God's name we can experience the divine. So in terms of an idea that the human beings are here to actually experience the divine, obviously it's like going the next step, not just dating somebody, but actually getting married to them. Yeah. Now morality for us, a lot of people when they talk about God, they then want to define morality and then say, I get my morality from God. So we tend to say that our morality comes from the idea of compassion and justice. Now, if we don't have a rule book, right, because a rule book doesn't really work in every single example, yet if we still have ideas and principles like compassion, like justice, then we can actually step out into that moral void that's out there, where there's lots of grey areas where you can't exactly have a rule book that covers everything. But if you're a character-based ethic, as Sikhi tries to be, to give you the right characters and to learn the examples of our gurus and watch what they did, which is for us is gurmat, learning from them as perfect beings, perfectly enlightened beings, then we can actually learn and temper our actions in accordance with their teachings. So we need people who are spiritually enlightened, and then we need to follow them because they actually show us how the rest of us should live. That's why the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, our scripture, doesn't just have the Guru's writings inside it. The Guru did something very unique. Inside our main text, they put in writings by people of other traditions to show us that there are people in every faith that have the same feeling, the divine inside them, and that really Sikhi would be a path of saints, to copy those people who are enlightened and how that they behave, mostly, well, nearly all the time, which is all about compassion and justice.
Thank you. Does society need God? I suppose the question is, does society need a belief in God to be does it make a society a better society? I think a society doesn't need the belief in God in order to exist. We have examples of societies that do not believe in God, and they do exist, although quite miserable societies. North Korea would be an example. But the question is, does it benefit society? And I think the answer is yes, as demonstrated by the previous, by some of the previous speakers. Do we need, is God existing a prerequisite for morality? I think no. Morality is a sense. We all have a moral sense. We all have a conscience. The question is, do we have a motivation to use that? And here I think this is where God comes into playing a role. Because if all we are is a pile of matter, and all we are is stuff, biological stuff, then it makes no sense to exercise that moral sense. And then it comes down up to what our will is. If we want to be moral, then we will be. If we won't, we won't. And there is nothing to tell us that we ought to be moral, as Shabir pointed out before. So the question is, would people actually be moral? Would the world be a place with a moral society without God? I think the answer has to be no, because in order to act morally, in order to feel the need to act morally, a person that requires a sense of purpose, of destiny, that comes only if we believe in the transcend, something beyond matter.
Okay, so who kind of deems something to be right and wrong?
So your question is, who decides what is right or what is moral?
Yeah, because who is true and who is not? Because I think a lot of faiths fight over all the time. I'm better than you, and I just want to know who is saying that.
Okay. I'll pass it on.
That's a very good question, and I think the answer lies with two things. First of all, I hope we all have the emotion of empathy. That's the ability to understand the feelings of others. And if we can understand how another person reacts as a result of our behaviour or the behaviour of others, we can erect moral rules to ensure that bad behaviour is different from good behaviour. The second point is that human beings, we have to be social animals. We can't live in a harmonious society unless we agree on a set of rules. Now, I think those rules, for me, personally, come from the feeling of empathy. They come from my ability to understand how someone else feels when wrong is done to them. So my morality says, without question, murder is always morally wrong. Now, if another person comes up to me and says, well, there are certain circumstances where killing someone is absolutely necessary, like self-defense, I might agree. But it is still a moral wrong. Killing a fellow human being is morally wrong, whether it's done by an individual or done by the state. Creating a set of morals is about how we understand each other in society and how we work together in society to be a harmonious whole. It doesn't have to come from holy books. If you think about it, the religions represented here are relatively modern. Where did rules and morality come from before religions came about? Societies have always had to have some form of rule, and those rules are based upon their understanding of each other as human beings through empathy.
Reverend Richard, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, Jesus said, wanting to boil down particularly the Ten Commandments, which will be a helpful guide for society, but he said ultimately, love God and love your neighbour as yourself. And I think those are two very good principles to undergird right living and public life. And I think that the challenge is, I mean, empathy, I've met a lot of people that don't have much empathy. And we do, across our different faiths, do disagree about specifics of morals and what it means to be a public person of faith. That's where we need to allow for pluralities, for difference in our lives together, and particularly a city like Birmingham, university like this, a country like ours. Religion is real, the deepest motivations for so many people. We need to work out together what we can agree on and disagree well on the stuff that we can't.
Rikesh?
So in Hinduism we have this view that ahimsa paramo dharma. Ahimsa is the highest righteous duty. So ahimsa means non-violence, or non-violence as far as possible, which is a relative term. So Max just pointed out that, for example, killing a human being is wrong, but actually, why isn't killing an animal wrong? For example, you know, we should have like a selfless view towards everything. So these guidelines, essentially, in our religion, they aim for us to be less selfish. So selflessness goes towards dharma, or this idea of righteousness, and selfishness goes away from dharma or righteousness. So, you know, in everything that we do in life, it actually comes from ourselves. So, you know, would you eat at McDonald's, for example, because, you know, they mass kill animals? Or, you know, would you buy leather belts? Or, you know, how much is your carbon footprint, for example? So, for me, yes, they don't have to come from scriptures, but the scriptures do provide a sound basis of ethical considerations as well.
Shabir?
I think it is important to recognize that there is nothing moral about the physical universe. We can describe how electrons move, but there's no right and wrong about how it moves. That's just the way it is. Well, the universe, having no morality of its own, has in some way apparently given rise to human beings who have a sense of morality. So this sense of morality, does it come from the blind, unthinking universe, or does it come from an intelligent being who gave us that sense? Now, to say that that morality that we have came from this blind chance process of evolution is like saying, well, that somebody who doesn't know a subject taught me this subject, and I'm proud that I've learned this subject from that person who doesn't know the subject. So if the universe does not have any morality of its own, but taught us morality, why should we be proud of that moral sense that we have? But on the other hand, if we believe that God exists, He is a supremely moral being, and He gave us that moral sense, then we can be proud of that moral sense that we have. Before we start deciding what are the specific things we have to do in order to show that we are morally right, or just simply to be morally right, just the sense itself. And I agree with the questioner who seemed to be thinking, well, it's not right for people to be fighting over religion. Yeah, that's true. We shouldn't be fighting over religion. It is good that we sit together, we discuss, we share ideas, we learn from each other, and we grow in our understanding by hearing Rick speak about ahimsa. We all rally to that principle. Yes, non-violence. If we could all practice something like ahimsa, the world would be so much of a better place. This is why I respect the teachings of Islam, which strikes a balance in that while it recognizes some of the practical needs of life, it also stresses things like non-violence where this is appropriate. So in terms of understanding others and understanding the morality of others, in classical Islamic terms, non-Muslims were allowed to live in Muslim societies as protected minorities, given the right to act according to their religious principles and teachings, so that even though Islamic societies would normally in classical times ban alcohol, they allowed for Christians and Jews as protected minorities to consume alcohol and even to ferment it in their societies, because the rationale was that this is allowable according to their faith rules, and therefore we respect that.
Rebecca.
Sorry.
We all have a moral sense, and definitely morality depends on that sense, but we all know that also that sense might differ from one to another. And although on the big things we might agree, when it comes to minor things we might disagree. So obviously here comes tradition plays a major role within any moral system. Moral system cannot be seen as detached from a specific tradition, moral tradition. And the example which Shabir brought before, where the Islamist rulers can understand that there are other moral traditions, but that exist nonetheless, and give respect to those traditions. Obviously, that is not any moral system can accept any other type of moral systems. There are limits to our pluralism as well, and acceptance as well. But by and large, I think it works, and it works well.
Okay, so obviously from the Sikh point of view, we will say that the divine creator, Waheguru, sent our gurus, and they sent them with the aim to teach us how a human being should live. A holistic approach. You might say that the person who created the world created a disease in all of us called ego. Right? Everybody is hampered by this disease, all of us, myself included, and it manifests itself in 5 main parts: lust, anger, greed, pride, and attachment. These things cause all the problems that we see in the world. But since He created the disease, He also created the doctor. And He sent this doctor down as our guru to tell us, all of us, how can we get ourselves to be better. So the Guru is like, he's trying to cure society. So for us, the morals do come from our Guru. However, the Guru taught us to be very tolerant. One example I said earlier was about how they put the scriptures or the writings of other saints inside the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Now obviously these people hailed from other religious traditions, say Hinduism, Islam, even people who were sort of not tied to any religion. But yet the message was remarkably the same, about compassion, about righteousness, about not taking the rights of others. Guru also gives an example using things like, for example, they say, well look, a Hindu would never eat beef and a Muslim would never eat pork, and so a Sikh should never steal. So they give the example of how other people view things in order to teach us what's totally forbidden for us. In the same way, they wouldn't enforce their religion upon other people. The famous conversation happened with Guru Gobind Singh Ji and Bahadur Shah, who was the Mughal king at that time, the 10th Guru and the Mughal king. And he said, which is better? Which do you think is better? Your religion or my religion? And Guru Gobind Singh Ji said, Tum ko tumhara khoob, humko hamara khoob. Mine is beautiful to me, to you yours is beautiful. So tolerance is very much a part of Sikhi. And the 6th Guru, the grandfather of the 10th Guru actually, he was asked at one point by some of the poor Muslims, and I don't say poor Muslims, I don't mean sad Muslims, I mean the people that actually didn't have much money. They asked the 10th Guru, the 6th Guru, we haven't got enough money to build a mosque. And so Guru, being a physical leader and a spiritual leader, he actually made them a mosque. And that place still exists now in Punjab. It's called Guru Ki Masjid, the mosque of the Guru. And so the Gurus will always tell us, look, be tolerant. There are many paths to the one. However, all those paths must walk the same path, i.e. of compassion, of justice, of looking at other people as the light of God inside them. And then for us, we may have a different way of worship, we have a different way of praying. That doesn't mean that other ways are illegitimate. It just means that they also must kind of follow this path of the saints. So there is criticism of other faiths made, but yet Guru says be tolerant, because all you can do is be a good person and inspire the people to be better yourselves. If you start imposing your rules upon other people, then society won't work. So it's more pragmatic.
I'd like to expand on the point made earlier and the question that was proposed, that who defines morality and how is it defined? For example, for faiths and ways of life that attribute themselves to a divine being or some sort of divinity, one can say that our values and what we think is right and wrong, we attribute to a greater being, a greater value giver. But for the atheist perspective, I'd like to ask, how do they define morality? For example, let's for instance go back a few years and let's look at late racism and how, in a society where racism was accepted freely, how would they go against that? As we know today it's wrong, but in those days, how would the atheists define that, racism was wrong? Even homosexuality, like going back a few hundred years, homosexuality was frowned upon. But for the atheist perspective, how can you say that's wrong? And for future generations, let's for instance say there's another disease or another disease in society that we see now as correct, but in the future that it'll be accepted. How would you define that as being wrong? For the people who follow faiths and religions, one can say, our great deities define it as right and wrong. But for the atheists, there is no basis for morality. I'd like to ask you to solve that question.
Basically, the summary of the question is, how do you deal with how do you deal with subjective morality and morality that changes over time?
Yeah. Well, can I just say, as somebody who fought racism for 40 years in Derby, I don't find it at all difficult to fight racism because of empathy. Because I understand that my fellow human being is being oppressed for unfair and unjust reasons, and I will not put up with it. And I will do something about it, and I have done something about it. What I don't like is the fact that this is all very cosy. I want to judge people and religions by what they do, not by what they claim to believe. It's all very well theoreticians saying we believe this, we share this with this other faith, but let's look at the world today. There are almost no conflicts in the world today that are not intra-religious violence or inter-religious violence. If you look at the Central African Republic, we have Christians killing Muslims and Muslims killing Christians. If we look at Many of the other conflicts in the world today, we find people of one religion killing people of the same religion. Is this morally acceptable? There are 13 countries in the world today where I would be put to death. Anyone who makes an open statement that they are an atheist, they have no need for God in order to answer the big questions of life. Anyone who makes that statement in one of these 13 countries can be put to death. Now, not that long ago, it wasn't 13 countries. Not that long ago, this country would have put me to death as a heretic because I wasn't a Christian. So we're in 2014, and what I ask you to do is not to just look at your own personal sense of morality, but to also look at what is done in the name of your religion, in the name of your God, and how can that be possibly justified? I don't know any dispute in the world where people are fighting one another on behalf of non-belief. North Korea, I don't know what sort of state North Korea is, communist it certainly isn't, is a dictatorship. It's not as it is for non-religious reasons. It's simply a dictatorship. There are no conflicts in the world where atheists are fighting religious people over non-belief. It's religious people fighting religious people. So why is the morality claimed by the theorists not put into practice in the real world? The real world is conflict over religion.
I think trying to address the answer to which was, I mean, the question posed was, how would you define morality over time? So you've had a little dig at people's theories, which they'll have to respond to, but how would you have subjective morality? So something that is seen as fine and perfectly permissible today, or allowed, or society can do it, how would an atheist, with the absence of God and literature, deal with something that changes over time in terms of morality?
Well, very quickly, I thought I answered that right at the very beginning. My objection to racism is because I understand how some other person is oppressed. Something is unfair and unjust. If I am being oppressed, I would like people to defend me. Racism is wrong because it oppresses another human being. It's unjust and unfair. What more do you need?
Shabir, would you like to answer the point of most wars, most conflicts tend to happen due to people of religion, where you have Christians killing Muslims, or within Muslims you have sectarian differences? How does religion, how do people of theology answer this?
Sure. Yeah, and of course I don't want it always to be that I come right after Mike and say something contrary to what he has said. It should go the other way as well, so we can give Mike the last word on things like this. According to Keith Ward, and I have this book here, Is Religion Dangerous? The idea that wars are fought by religious people, in fact, is an overgeneralization, and it does not take into consideration what we know about the last two world wars. The early part of the 19th century has shown us the brutality that human beings are capable of. And none of these wars had anything to do with religion. World War I, World War II. And probably if there is a World War III, it will also have nothing to do with religion. But what people do is that they use religion as a cover for some of their brutalities. They want to give it a kind of a moral shield and say we're doing something right. So when the then President of the United States wanted to launch an attack on Afghanistan, he referred to it as a crusade, only to withdraw his terminology later on in the face of opposition. But sometimes people try to put their actions, evil as they may appear to others, in a kind of a religious garb. So I don't think it is correct to say that people are fighting because of religion. In the Central African Republic, I would say they're fighting because of ignorance. Neither Islam nor Christianity teach the people in the Central African Republic to kill each other. Christianity we know to be a very peaceful religion. Islam has been associated with some violence, but at the same time, there is nothing in Islam that teaches Muslims to kill innocent civilians. There are rules about entering into battle and soldiers fighting against soldiers, but Islam does not in any way justify the killing of civilians outside of that battle scenario, outside of the battlefield. So, in short, it is not true to say that people are fighting over religion. According to Dr. Keith Ward, people are fighting because of greed, of the desire for power, disputes over land and such issues. It's not really about religion, though they might drag religion into it.
Rabbi Khan, as somebody from the Jewish faith, and especially with a lot of tension that happens in the Middle East between Israel and the Muslim world, would you have any comments to put into this?
Well, in the Encyclopedia of Wars, there are 1,763 wars documented from the beginning of time, wars that we know of, out of which 123 were over religion, which is a nice number, but not even close to being a majority. Now, obviously, people fight over what is important to them, and we take our religion very seriously. So, obviously, we tend to fight over important things which we think are important, and religion is important, so we fight. Does it mean religion causes war? No, it is human nature that causes war. And we know that human nature is not only good. It might be also good, although there would be people that might even argue that. But we definitely have a lot of bad things about us. All of us, in our nature. That's just part of who we are. If we, for example, if we take children in the playground playing and a new child comes about, what is the natural reaction of the children to the new one? Do they immediately embrace him and say, oh, here's a new child, let's bring him in, play with him, what a wonderful thing. That won't be a natural reaction of children to a new child. And it is only with time and education and teaching of values that children grow out of it and become mature moral beings. So there are a lot of things about our nature that cause us to do terrible things. Obviously, when we are religious, then that aspect of us also might play a role in our religious practice, but it is not a fault of religion, it is a fault of people who are practicing the religion.
As the youngest religion in the world, I kind of feel like that young kid walked into the playground. Everybody's trying to claim us to be part of them. So, but we're trying to stay ourselves. No, we're our own religion. The thing about, there's an analogy there. For example, in Birmingham's got really dodgy roads. Have you noticed? There's like roundabouts and all this crazy stuff. And everybody's always getting lost. So you imagine you're driving in Birmingham, and then you look in the mirror, and behind you is a police car. Right? You will not have driven as good as you have for the last 5 years as you do on that day. It's like you're back at the driving school. Yeah. So effectively, for us, knowing that there is this Creator who's watching us. Now, where does the knowing come from? Well, for some people, it may come from the idea that the text or that God, created the world from. They may get it from kind of scientific examples or whatever arguments, and they accept it on intellectual level. However, the Sikh faith, as a faith which is trying to get you to meditate and experience the divine, so that once a person experiences the divine as true, and they know, and effectively they're always aware that there's this police car behind them, watching them, right? And when that police car is behind you, then you make sure you make your actions come into line with what the teachings are. So just like a child needs to be taught what is good, what is right, but as soon as the parent's not there, they try to get away with it. At this point, when somebody comes into the idea, when they experience the divine, and that should be the hope for all of us, that suddenly they start thinking, oh, you know what, I need to check my behavior at all times, okay, day and night, and even in our dreams, to the point where the gurus would say that don't even dream of going to the bed of another woman, even when you're asleep. Not even like when you're looking at somebody, but even when you're sleeping. To get to that level of control, to control your thoughts, even when you're not conscious, requires a lot of careful management of your thought processes. Yeah, so it's mindfulness basically at all times, but mindful of the divine. So I think, morality can change. To go back to the point what was raised earlier, morality can change, but the principle of compassion doesn't change. And the Sikh view would be that actually God's grace rains down most there where the lowest of the low are looked after. So where the lowest of the low are being cared for by giving them food, by giving them medicine, by giving them clothing, which is what a Gurdwara effectively tries to do, is to give people free food and shelter. At that place is where the blessings of God are raining down. So actually a religious person doesn't really worry too much about what the atheists are thinking, because it's more about serving people who are in trouble. So I tend, that's why we tend not to focus upon these arguments so much. But
Reverend Richard, as a representative of the Christian faith and a lot of history related to Christian religion or culture, such as the Crusades and the current conflicts between Muslims and Christians in the Arab world, what would your views be on this?
Yeah, I think Mike's right to pick us up on some of this. We need to hear the critique from people of other faiths and of no religion about matching up words and deeds. I think it's right, as Shabir and Rabbi Hanan have demonstrated. I agree that war and violence in the name of religion is popularly overstated and historically, but all faiths, can I put it in these terms, have got mad ants in their cupboards. All right? We've all got histories that we'd rather shove under the carpet and not talk about, and we need to be honest about that. And can I say that includes atheist doctrines? So it's not so long ago that if you were a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu in communist Europe, you risked imprisonment and death. Nazi ideology was a pagan ideology where to believe in a transcendent God above the state would bring imprisonment and death. We have all got those terrible tales, which, again, agree Rabbi Hanan, reflect our human nature. So I think for those of us of faith, we need to be really conscious about doing what we're saying, matching up words and deeds. And that's what true faith is about. Faith resulting in action.